Hello, I'm Rob Coston from Nautilus International, the Union for Maritime Professionals. Now, in October last year, Nautilus members at the union's general meeting in Liverpool voted to commit the union to support neurodivergent seafarers. That was in a motion put forward by two of our members, and they spoke very passionately on that. That motion noted the positives that neurodivergent crew members bring to a vessel, and also the fact that they might face discrimination and professional disadvantages. Here to talk with me today and shed light exactly what neurodiversity is and what it means for maritime professionals is Daniel Smith from NeurodiversAtSea,
Hello.
which hello, Daniel. It's a campaign group that I believe recently became a registered charity. Yeah, Daniel, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, well, I wouldn't say we're a campaign group as such, although we that is the bulk of our work. Yeah, we became registered in July of this year, after about a year and a half of kind of being like an unregistered but constitution governed organization. Um, a lot what we do is actually, whilst I guess you could call it campaigning publicly, a lot of it is as is the way the maritime world works, behind the scenes work.
Mm,
So it's trying to lobby and then kind of in some ways or sometimes force organizations to make changes to the way in which things work, to try and remove some of the barriers that we've identified and that have
mm,
come to our attention to make things a little bit more fair for everybody, not just neurodivergent seafarers. We're very much a case of we should be fair for all. Our focus is on neurodivergence, obviously, because of that's where we have our experience, if you like. But we're not just trying to sort of go in there and say it must be a better place just for neurodivergent seafarers at the expense of the people. It's no, let's try and make it a better place for all of us.
well, great. Well, before we get into your work, I thought it was really important just to define neurodiversity for people, which I guess is quite a recent term, and a lot of people might not be familiar with it. So, yeah, what is meant by neurodiversity, and what kind of conditions does that cover, if conditions is the right word?
Yeah, so it is a new term and it's not. It's been around in different guises for let's say at least 20 years at this point. But essentially it's a newfangled way to describe an old thing. So if you imagine, so what I like to do is break it down into the two different bits of the same word. So you have neuro and diversity. So neuro is just brain. Yeah, so in this case, it just means the way in which we think, whether that's translates to the way in which we interact with the world around us, or the way in which the world around us interacts with us, or how we interpret its interactions. So that's what neuro means. Diversity is just a fancy way of saying difference, because we want to make ourselves look bigger than we actually are. Yeah. So it actually, when you think about it, it is just a fancy way of saying different ways of thinking. However, human nature being what it is, likes to complicate matters. So, in our quest to put things in nice, neat little boxes that everything has its place, neurodiversity has kind of evolved to mean a little more than just the base definition of different ways of thinking, to essentially two different groups: neurodivergent and neurotypical. So, neurodivergent are people who think, interact with the world around them differently than everybody else around them, who is described as being neurotypical because they are kind of the average way of doing things. So in reality, that is autistics like myself, ADHDers, dyslexics, dyspraxics, dyscalculics, dysgraphics. Um, there is some research out there to say that Tourette's may also now be a part of the neurodivergent spectrum. There is debate about, does it now include things like anxiety? Does it include sort of acquired conditions as opposed to the conditions that you had when you were born? It's one of these big things that's in flux at the moment. But from my standpoint, at the moment, we can sort of consider it at NeurodiversAtSea to be dyslexics, dyspraxics, dyscalculics, dysgraphics, autistics, and ADHDers, as sort of like a primary focus area. But if, as time goes on, it expands to Tourette's, it expands to OCD and what have you, then we'll follow that kind of trend along.
Yeah, so I was doing a bit of research ahead of this, and I saw one figure that perhaps 15% of people have are considered neurodivergent in one way or another. And that's quite a broad spectrum of things you talked about there. So
Yeah.
there's quite a lot of variation within that. Um, do you have any sense about people working at sea? Sort of how common is this? How likely are you to be neurodivergent if you're a seafarer, or how likely are you to encounter other seafarers who are neurodivergent when you're on board?
So the data we have, because unfortunately there's no, at least at the moment, there's no concrete data on this from the likes of the MCA or um, different training institutions and what have you, despite asking for it a number of times. But the data we've got from our own research suggests that there is probably about a 50% split of neurodivergent versus non-neurodivergent. However, that number, whilst it sounds really big on paper, actually it's probably going to be a bit lower than that, purely because when we conducted research, obviously it was done by LinkedIn, our own sort of groups, if you like, of followers are obviously quite neurodivergent because of what we do and how we do it. So treat that number with a bit of caution, a bit of, a pinch of salt. But I'd say in reality, once all said and done, you're looking more about between 20 and 30%
And That's
in
that's
one form
quite
or another.
high then. If that first figure I gave is for the general population, you sounds like you'd be more
Yeah,
likely to encounter somebody at sea.
yeah. I mean, it's one of those things about seafaring is that actually a lot of it appeals to neurodivergent individuals. You know, rigid routine that's predictable months in advance, same thing day in, day out, same people day in, day out, unless it's crew change, you know, same cabin day in, day out. A lot of people find that quite appealing.
Mm.
So it does tend to attract a lot of people into the industry. But it's also worth noting, of course, so that number you researched possibly split. So it would not have considered what are called SPLDs. So that's your dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, as being neurodivergent. They are normally lumped into something else called like learning differences.
Mm.
And so sometimes when you read a figure of 50%, it can be a little bit
I see.
wishy-washy as to is it actually all the conditions or is it just this one group of conditions? Because if you look at the data that the UK government put out, they segment it off.
Yeah.
So autism is in a different category to dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, and I think it may even be separate to ADHD as well. So it becomes a really big quagmire of numbers that don't quite make sense.
Yeah, no, it must be hard to get figures. And my first thought was, oh, well, maybe you could figure it out by looking at the impact of something like MIN 676, which allows for extra time in exams for people who come forward and say they have something like dyslexia. But of course, that wouldn't cover a lot of the other areas you've talked about here. So, um,
So, well, that's actually a bit of that's a common misconception actually. So, and it's one that we're working quite hard behind the scenes to try and fix and rectify. So, MIN 676, which for those that don't know, is a marine information note that covers both the merchant and fisheries side of seafaring. And basically says that during IARME exams or SQA exams, like written exams, you are entitled to certain accommodations if you are neurodivergent. Um, the M notice is written to be very, very dyslexia heavy because that's initially how it was produced. It was not made with neurodivergence in mind, but it has since been updated, I think in 2022 ish, to now encompass all neurodivergent conditions. So even though you may be told that you can only apply because you're dyslexic, you can't apply if you're dyspraxic or autistic. That's completely false. The end notice does. There's I think it's paragraph 8.7. I think it is offhand. That says that the end notice is now applicable to all neurodivergent conditions. Which is an issue we've come across quite a lot of people saying, well, I've been denied this, and you have to sort of say, well, no, actually, you've been denied it, but you shouldn't have been. This is why. You
yeah.
know,
So,
go back
so,
and go into debate about it.
so that's talking a bit about the examination side, but bringing back to when you're established in your career, sort of what kind of impact does having a neurodiverse condition or being neurodivergent have on you as a seafarer? Again, it's hard to generalize, but yeah, perhaps you could give a flavor of the kinds of
Yeah,
issues you
so
see.
it's I like to sort of rephrase the question in that it is never the person who is, I suppose you could say, impacted by their condition. It is the environment around them that impacts them because of their condition, if that makes sense. Or I'd put it somewhat
Mm.
differently, even though I hate to use the word disabling. The person is not disabled by their condition. It is the environment around them that is disabling. So, for me, for example, one of my big issues is heat. So a lot of autistic people have sensory processing differences. Either we'll be hypersensitive to certain things, so we'll be very sensitive to certain things. We'll be hypo as opposed to hyper, so we'll be undersensitive to other things. That'll fluctuate day to day, hour to hour sometimes. So for me, heat is a big one, which unfortunately means that I need vessels that are air conditioned. Um, I haven't always got that, I think is the best way to put it. And that has had a really negative impact on how I performed on board. Despite still being able to do the job and kind of, keep up my duties, it has meant that I have basically had to go to my cabin straight afterwards and just crash in bed and hope I can sleep, and recharge a little bit, which other people may not have experienced in the same way. Um, you'll tend to find that you may be more socially excluded or isolated because you may not be as outgoing as everybody else. So you end up being viewed a little bit as being a bit weird because you're not engaging in the karaoke every night in the bar. You're not up until silly hours drinking before your watch or after your watch, if your ship allows that, of course. Um, so that can obviously be a bit of an issue. Even someone who's dyslexic can sometimes have challenges because the aids that they would need to help them flourish, which is usually as simple as a bit of coloured overlay. For those of you who are old enough to remember going to school and the old projector coming out and having a bit of acetane that they wrote on top of on the projector with to put it on the whiteboard, similar thing but coloured, so they can just put it on top of a bit of paper and read through it. Because a lot of ships don't have that on board for one reason or another, it will take them a lot longer to sort of read some material, and they may make spelling mistakes because of it. Um, which means that they have to work twice as hard to get the same thing done. Despite the fact they're more than capable of doing the job, it is, like I said, the environment that's disabling that person, not the person who's disabled. Um, yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it must be quite a broad spectrum there. Everything from being
Yeah.
in the mess room through to actually performing your duties on board, through to perhaps it being overlooked. If in terms of getting promotion or something like that,
hmm
if you have
Oh,
issues
absolutely.
with writing reports or something like that.
It's that's the thing. You tend to find that a lot of people who would absolutely excel in higher ranks will get held or held behind or held back
Mm,
because the industry doesn't understand them, if you
mm,
like. It doesn't understand what neurodivergence is. I mean, neurodivergence is still very much an unknown, and that means that unfortunately, you know, if you say you are, for example, let's say autistic, there's more likelihood of you losing your job or you being held behind, and so told where you're not suitable for this role purely because of misconception and misunderstanding than actual need to be held back.
mm.
Um, even something as simple as I was just recently, oh well, how do you get a medical if you're autistic? Quite easily, you just say you're autistic. But because people seem to think that it's such a disabling condition, even though again it's not the condition that's disabling, it's the environment, they don't understand that no, you can work at sea completely, absolutely fine. And I mean, most people I've met who are neurodivergent will, again, not wish to blow people's horns, I suppose, but will happily run rings around the average seafarer because they're so accustomed to having to work twice as hard to just keep up because the environment's holding them back. That when you remove that disabling environment, they'll just charge away. Um, and that's one of the things we're trying to do is get across the messaging that if you make this, make some small changes to the environment on board, or the way you recruit people, or the way you retain people, or the way whatever it may be, you'll find that all of a sudden these people who have just been have been keeping up will start to flourish and will just race away,
Mm.
which is an advantage to you as a business.
Yeah, so I want to talk in a second about what you're campaigning for and what you'd like to see from the industry. But in the situation as it is now, do you have any advice for seafarers who are neurodivergent about what kind of things they should do to make things better for themselves? For example,
So
in terms of looking for a particular jobs or anything like that.
So it depends a little bit as to where you are in your career. If you are a cadet, absolutely ask for help and support. At college, pretty much every college in the UK has a fairly robust system in place to provide help and support. So absolutely go for that. That's a massive recommendation. Um, ask for help and support during your exams. You're entitled to it if you need it. Don't be scared to ask for it. Ask for it, use it. It's there for a reason. Don't let yourself have a harder time because you're scared to ask for help. When it comes to then working on board, the advice I give is be picky. You will always find that when you find a good ship owner or a good ship manager who understands the human element, you will not be scared. Well, you always be apprehensive, but you will not be scared to go up and ask for help and support from them for things. And when you do go and ask for it, you will get it, or they'll be receptive and they won't dismiss you outright. They'll say, okay, well, we can't really give you this because of this, this, and this, but would you be willing to, can we give you this instead of like meeting you halfway sort of thing? It'll be a, two-way conversation. Whereas most ship owners who don't think like that will just be, no, that's it, or well, you don't deserve to be at sea. Bye bye. So yeah, be picky at the moment. And I guess the other thing is don't be scared to stand up and say who you are. I know it's a bit of a misnomer, given I've just said be picky as to who you work for, because people will probably treat you wrongly at bad places. But at the same time, don't be scared to say, no, I am this, I deserve this. And if you can't give it to me, I will find someone that can. I will find somewhere that can.
Yeah. Oh, also, I mean, I would say this, but I think it's really important to emphasize if you're a member of Nautilus International, we can help if you feel like you're not being treated properly on board, or if you're a cadet and you need extra help getting through to your college or getting support, our organizers are there to help you. So yeah, please get in touch with us if you're in that situation. Moving on to the political side, or I suppose the industry side, what kind of thing are you hoping to see from industry? What are you working on?
So our big goal is to remove barriers. So for us, it's acknowledging that the industry thus far has done quite a poor job of supporting individuals and making them feel welcome. And it's recognizing that it has to do better, it must do better, and therefore it will do better. So we are working, or we're trying to work with some organizations to have a look at MAN 676, for example, and how we can reword that to make that easy to understand and to make sure that every organization, whether it's IARMI, SQA, whatever, that has to abide by it, does so properly and not using outdated information or misunderstandings or, limiting it to dyslexia when it's actually applicable to everybody. Looking at, but not just looking at sort of the exams and everything, but also, I guess, just it's that thing, isn't it, maritime? It's the human element. It's trying to get companies to understand there's a human element here. There's a human element at play, a human element, I should say, at play. So actually listen to it. I'm sure that people in crewing or HR, or boardroom level of companies who treat people the way some do would be horrified if it was their son, their daughter, their wife, their husband. So trying to get across to say, look, well, if you treat people like that at your company, but you're horrified by your own family being treated like it, surely you want everybody to be treated the same as you'd want your family or friends to be treated. So it's just trying to say, look, this is an issue. The solutions are simple, and the biggest one is just treat people like how you want to be treated, how you'd like your relatives, your loved ones to be treated. Um, yeah, I can't really say kind of what we're working on in much detail because there's quite a lot, but a lot of it is, unfortunately, my time is behind the scenes,
Mm.
behind closed doors. Um, but yeah, that's the biggest thing I think publicly we're trying to work on.
Yeah, thank you. And it sounds like there's a little bit of trying to get rules changed or get guidelines in place, and probably quite a lot of talking to companies and trying to get them to
Yes.
change how they
Yeah.
act rather than just what's written on a piece of paper.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, if anybody would like to get involved with Neurodiverse at Sea, or I don't know, do you offer direct support, or are you?
So we don't, unfortunately. We
Mm,
kind of, because we're such a small team, we find that working with the likes of Nautilus or Ice One or what have you, is a far better way of reaching more people than helping individuals. That said, if someone does come to me and say, "Hey, look, I've got this issue, how would I deal with it, or where can I go?" and we can signpost people, but we don't, as a matter of routine, work with individuals kind of start to finish because, like I say, there's only four of us. I'm the only one who's not on, not the way it's at the moment. So yeah, it's unfortunately we haven't got time for it. I wish
Yeah.
we did, but it's the way it is.
Yeah, well, it sounds like at least you can sort of point people in the right direction, maybe if they
Yeah.
do come to you. But yeah, if people do want to get involved in your work, how can they find you and see what you're up to? How can they reach you?
So we're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. Drop us an email. Probably the best way there if you try and get hold of us. So that's hello at neurodiversatsea.org. And either I'll pick that up or the team will pick it up, and we'll try our best to sort of, if we have a need for someone, we'll actually take that on. We've launched a speaker bank recently. So if you want to be part of that, if you're a neurodivergent seafarer who wants to go into, schools or sometimes companies, or if we get an offer to go and speak at a conference, you know, do reach out to us through that. Sign up for Speaker Bank. We're trying to, increase the amount of neurodivergent representation at different conferences and things. So please, that's a way you can help us. It's really easy, really convenient for you. That's pretty hands off for all of us.
Great, thank you. Well, I'll put those details in the notes with this video. And yeah,
Fantastic.
thank you. Thanks very much for giving us a tour of all of this and helping us understand it a bit better.
Likewise, I mean, thank you for Nautilus for picking the picking up the torch, as it were, last year. I think it was the two members you were talking to. I think one of them was James Stockbridge, who was
Yes.
involved with us quite heavily, because that was kind of one of our things behind the scenes of, how can we convince people to start changing? Oh, the union.
Yeah, and I think yeah, I think some people were very skeptical when they saw that motion, and when those two members spoke, James, I think was the proposer of that motion. I think it really changed a lot of people's minds when they explained things, and so hopefully
Yeah,
this will have had the same effect. And
yeah. Hopefully, I mean, it's a case in point with that. Actually, I remember James telling me a story afterwards of um he was speaking to somebody before the motion was tabled, and it was this person was, quite dismissive and quite, "Oh, why would I want to do that? Blah 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 blah." And after, I think it was George who got up and spoke about his experience of being autistic at sea and what being autistic means to him. This same person came to James afterwards and went, "Yeah, that describes me. How can I help?"
yeah,
So it's that simple thing. If people, you may have been at sea for 20, 30 years and just thought this is normal.
yeah,
And of course, it's not that it's not normal, but it's not normal to struggle in the same way. So it's one of the things we're hoping for is as we kind of, develop and the movement builds, people go, actually, yeah, that does describe me. It's not okay I went through that. It's not okay I struggled like that. I
yeah,
shouldn't have to have that battle with myself.
yeah. And the impact that I saw talking to a couple of people was that they realised that other people they'd worked with at sea that they'd really respected, or who'd been their mentor or something like that at sea, had probably had a neurodiverse condition and they'd never even realized that the
Yep.
person had that. So yeah, really interesting stuff.
Happens more often than not.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Daniel, and talk to you again soon.
Likewise. Pleasure. Thank you much.